Sylvia Adams was an art dealer in the 50s and 60s. And when she became very elderly, it was clear that one of the things that she'd done when she was buying and selling things for her clients was that she'd bought a lot of very valuable things herself. She had a wonderful eye for treasures, and she had no family. And in her very sort of last, months, she decided that she would allow the sale of her goods to be used to establish a charitable trust. We've got three major areas of concern that are pretty fixed. So we're very interested in children and young people. We're very interested in people with a disability and those who are living in poverty or who are socially excluded. The project we're funding with African Initiatives is support for the work of the Pastoral Women's Council, PWC, up in the far sort of north of Tanzania, on the Kenyan border in the Maasai area. And PWC do a lot of different activities in their own region of Ngorongoro, including women's empowerment, and also working with the Maasai community as a whole on land rights. But the particular area that we're supporting financially is their education work. And the focus is very much on girls, because girls, again, were particularly poorly represented in the pastoralist communities and in the Maasai community in education, anything beyond the middle of primary education. So PWC are running nurseries, supporting nurseries across the area in order to, if you like, sort of get girls in at the bottom level of education. They're also supporting a lot of primary schools in the area, and they're running a secondary school called Emenyata. And so, our money is going into that project generally with them. To get to meet the PWC people at Loliondo, a little town called Loliondo, we drove to one of the national parks. We turned right, and we drove for 6 hours using a compass. Basically, there were no roads. There were sort of ruts in the sand, but basically we drove for 6 hours using a compass, and I was sitting in the back, faintly terrified that we wouldn't ever get there. We were staying in a hospital guest house, and we arrived in the middle of the day after this rather, scary journey across the desert. And we were waiting for Maanda, who heads up PWC, to come and meet us. And the evening went on and she hadn't arrived. And then all of a sudden, she arrived with some of her staff in her Maasai dress, and had got a complete programme organised for us. Absolutely wonderful, the trouble that PWC had gone to make sure that we saw as much as possible. So the next day we went to see the office, which is a very simple sort of 2-room building, but in comparison to other offices we'd seen in Tanzania, incredibly well organised and clean and tidy and everything working properly. We then moved on to sort of travel in the Jeep, sort of through the bush, and we went to a nursery school. And we met the teacher there and the women's committee that have come together to organise the school. We then went to a couple of secondary schools, one where we met sort of the teachers and saw the buildings and some of the equipment and what they were trying to achieve. And then we went to Emenyata and met some of the girls there. And so, it was very, very powerful to meet individual girls telling their own stories, and also to see, the provision that has to be made in terms of accommodation and food and clothing in order to allow girls, to carry on with their education. So yes, I think it's that personal sort of statement that brings it to life when you're actually there. We went into a classroom of girls who were about 16, who were sort of coming up to GCSE level. And we, obviously through an interpreter, we spoke to them about why we were there. And a young lady at the back stood up and said, her father didn't want her to go to school, and she was very grateful to PwC for sponsoring her and allowing her to go to school. And she was, she loved school, she wanted to do well, she wanted to have a career. But every time she went home, she was frightened that she wouldn't be able to come back again. And so she would like us to pay for the girls to be able to stay at school in Emanyata School through the holiday. And we acknowledged her speech and said thank you very much for sharing that with us. But we weren't there. That part of our trip wasn't to make new commitments for fundings. So we said something sort of fairly anodyne about, that's really interesting to hear, and, we hope that, everything goes well. And she stood up again and she said, but you haven't said that you will pay for us to stay here in the holiday. We need to be able to stay here because we may not get back if we go home. And that was very, we were strangers from a long way away, from a different world. And it was very impressive that this young girl had got the passion, but also the strength of character, not only to make her case once, but to pick up the fact that we were fudging the answer and to get up and make it again. So they were hugely impressive as an organisation. I think African Initiatives have chosen an absolutely wonderful partner. Of all the organisations we saw, they were the most impressive. One of the most impressive things was the way the local community responded to Maanda and her team as they were going around, and the obvious admiration that they had for her and for what she's doing for the community. It's rare that somebody is so highly regarded by their own community that trying to work with, that you pick up this sort of tangible feeling that they're doing a wonderful job. I think there are a number of building blocks without which development can't take place, and education is obviously one of them. Health is one of the others, really. If you can't educate your young people adequately, then moving forward with a population who can grasp opportunities and provide good governance and so on, is very, very difficult.